Well, Tony Windsor has just released a memoir titled Windsor's Way, and he joins us now. Tony, welcome to The Drum.
Oh, thanks, Dave.
Now, I wanted to talk about one of the themes you run with in the book is that how country people are ripped off when it comes to the allocation of government resources. Spell it out for us. How bad is it for people in the bush?
Well, it depends which issue you're talking about, but at the formation of the hung parliament, both Tony Abbott and Julia Gillard admitted that at a federal level, country people had been ignored essentially in terms of policy issues. I think it's more policy than actually dollars. There is a dollar issue, but it's the policies that impact on country people that had been ignored for many years. And there's a good reason for doing that, because country people, even though they control 30% of the vote, they tend to vote the same way at every election. And one of the things that Oakeshott and I tried to do during the hung parliament was highlight the fact that it doesn't always have to be that way, that normally elections are determined by what happens in the western suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane. They can be determined, and in fact, since Federation, there hasn't been a federal parliament where a country member of that parliament hasn't held the balance of power. And I don't think country people realise that. They think because they're 30% of the vote, they'll always be dominated by the other 70.
So are they better off electing country independents, or do they not have a seat at the table and therefore not able to get the resources and the policy that's important for the bush?
Well, I think the issue is that they've been taken for granted. So political competition is the answer, whether that be by way of independence, or whether, more competition between the National Party and the Liberal Party, for instance, or the Labor Party paying some attention to country issues.
Give us an example of that, of how competition where you have a strong independent and a strong Nat running against each other actually leads to better results for a seat.
Well, I guess I'm living proof of that in the state seat of Tamworth and New England, in that rather than be ignored because you've gone outside the fold in terms of the so-called conservative vote in these country areas, the focus comes onto those areas in terms of the issues that concern those areas. We see it in the cities as well. The elections are debated in the marginal seats. The leaders go to the marginal seats. They don't go to the safe seats and reward those people who have been rewarding them for many years. So this, it's a very country way of doing things. I think if you stay loyal, you'll be rewarded. Well, the reverse is actually the case.
Well, I was going to say, this is a bit of an indictment of the National Party then, isn't it? It suggests that the National Party goes along far too often with the Libs, and they could perhaps assert themselves a little bit more.
Well, they should, and they have that opportunity. I think we saw an example of that with Brendan Grills in the Western Australian National Party, in a balance of power situation where he discussed the situation with both sides of politics, came up with a deal for his constituency, and in my view did a brilliant job. So it can be done. It's just that the Nationals tend to be subservient to the Liberals rather than standing up to them.
All right, Michael Bachelard's got a question for you, Michael.
Yes, some people accused you of sort of cutting and running in the 2013 election. Do you think you could have won that?
Okay, so Michael asked you, the question was, should you have stayed, really? Do you regret leaving in 2013?
Well, I missed bits of it. So in some ways I do regret leaving, but I had a daughter who was ill, who was getting married. I had a son who was getting married. I wanted to do the construction work in our garden for my daughter, and I didn't want to put my wife through what would have been a fairly heady election campaign. I loved them, but I think she'd have enough. I think now she'd say the reverse, that I should go again.
Is that a chance?
You can't win.
Is that a chance? You do a Grand Hackett?
You'll have to read the book, Mike. The book.
Tony, the mood was obviously fairly toxic during those years of minority government. Now we're halfway through the term of first term of the Abbott government, or maybe its only term. What's been your observations so far?
Well, I think that, and I don't want to sort of turn this into a pick on Tony Abbott. It's a difficult job to be the Prime Minister. It's a difficult job to be the Prime Minister, a very difficult job in a hung parliament, particularly. But I think a lot of the things that we sort of intimated at the time in terms of Tony Abbott's character are being reflected in this current parliament. It is a hung parliament because of the nature of the Senate. And I think there's a few people in the government, and it might surprise some people to suggest that Scott Morrison happens to be one of them, that he's actually trying to negotiate with people in the Senate. What we have here, and I don't think a lot of people fully realise it, the executive of governments don't realise it, our parliament is made up of two houses. So it's very rare that one persuasion has control over both. So people have got to deal with others in the parliament.
So you're seeing the same problems that he had in persuading you and Rob Oakeshott to get over the line to form minority government as he is with persuading the crossbenchers in the Senate to get the budget through?
Well, very much so. But where Tony Abbotts got himself into a problem is he made certain commitments before the election, and on the back of the Julia Gillard lie in terms of carbon tax, now he's changed a whole range of his commitments to the people and trying to get those through a Senate when they didn't go to the people in the first place. So he's got some real problems in dealing with this. But the way to do it, and as I said, Scott Morrison, Julie Bishop, they're able, I think, to actually start negotiating with these people. What they've got to do is pretty simple in my view, is enunciate the problem, and Joe Hockey did that in London some years ago with his end of entitlement speech, enunciate the problem and then come up, go to the people and say, the people in the Senate and say, well, how do we solve this? And there's only a few people in the government actually trying to do that, and Tony Abbott's not one of them.
Though the crossbench he's trying to negotiate with is a very different group of people to yourself and Rob Oakeshott and the likes. These are inexperienced people, many of them are first-termers, some of them have got less than 2% of the vote. That makes it more difficult for him, doesn't it, to negotiate with those people?
Well, the percentage of the vote is irrelevant. They're elected to one of our houses of parliament. But that doesn't mean that you can't form relationships with these people. They understand, the Ricky Muirs of this world, for instance, he knows how difficult it is to live in this world. He knows what it's like to not have a lot of money and not come from a wealthy background, etc. So you don't have to explain to him about budgetary processes, etc. What you do have to explain to him is how we can make it better for people in the long run rather than what they did in the last budget, which was essentially seen by all as being unfair to some. Those sorts of things can be overcome. If you remove the agenda of trying to run the old class political wars through the budgetary process and actually try and deal with the problem, I think you'll find that some of these people, Nick Xenophon and others, will come on board.
On the subject of Nick Xenophon, he came very close to getting, I think, 2 senators at the last election, and he's now talking about running candidates as part of a Nick Xenophon group against the likes of Christopher Pyne and others. How do you rate his chances?
Well, I think he's being seen as the voice of reason in this current parliament, in the Senate. So people who are sort of frustrated with the operations of the Senate may in fact see a Nick party, if that's what it eventually comes to. I haven't spoken to him about this, but they may be attracted to it. But I think it reflects a broader problem, is that there's this growing number of people, about 30% of the voters now, are looking for somewhere else to go. They don't trust Labor, they don't trust Liberal, and they don't like them. And hence they're looking for alternatives, and people like Xenophon present a pretty viable alternative.
Just briefly, you said the biggest disappointment of the 43rd Parliament was its failure to get together to successfully address humanely the issue of asylum seekers. Why is that? Why do you see that as the biggest disappointment?
Well, it's the one thing I'm ashamed of myself in terms. That's the issue that we failed. We failed the Australian people. We failed the asylum seekers. Every parliamentarian failed. There should have been a way to negotiate a pathway to come to some agreement and not leave it as it is at the moment. There is no victory in any of this for anybody. A slogan, stop the boats, etc., is as much a failure as many of the other things that have occurred in the past as well.